I see comments of people asking me all the time how I define my free-to-play decks, so let's talk about it right now. I used the same guidelines as Duel Links Meta back when they used to make free-to-play Duel Links videos, which is one main or two mini boxes in the game, or 3 deck build boxes because those are a thing right now, and those boxes are pretty small. So for example, here is a recent Evil Swarm deck that I have made. It uses the box Shark Fang, which is a main box. So in one main box, we get one ultra rare and 2 super rares. So that is what we are using in this deck. We are only playing a single copy of Caster and one copy of two copies of Carry because it is a super rare. And we are not going to use any other ultra rares or super rares from other boxes. We are only going to use ultra rares or super rares that are free to obtain. For example, O Lantern is a free to obtain super rare that you can get with tickets, so we can play as many copies of this card as we want to. For low rarity cards like Whorehouse and Cloak and Dagger, these are technically from different boxes, but because they're so cheap and they're so low rarity, I will still play them anyway, and because these cards are just really good in every single free-to-play deck that I play, because these are generic staple traps that are good in pretty much any deck, so if you get a couple of copies of these, you can pretty much use them in any deck, so it is not wasted. And these cards are just useful overall because we can't really play expensive staple cards like Book of Moon like people usually do, so these cards will be a substitute instead. I know sometimes I break my own rules. For example, this is my Witchcrafter deck, which uses one main and one mini box. As you can see, Madame Veer and the Shmieta is from the Witch's Sorcery main box, and the new stuff, which is Hane and the Search Spell, is from Explosion of Meteor, which is a mini box that is recently released. So this kind of goes against the rules that I made for myself, which is one main or two mini. But if you're just going to get one main or one mini for the case of decks like these, I think it kind of defeats the purpose of building the deck in general. So if you're gonna build a Witchcrafter deck, you gotta have both the Witch's Sorcery and the Explosion of Meteor boxes, for example. And I will still try to use as few cards from each box as possible, so as you can see we're only using one copy of the ultra rare and one copy of the super rare, so we will keep the budget as small as possible even if I'm going to sometimes violate my own rules. Let's also talk about structure decks, because as you can see, Dark Rebellion is from a structure deck, and we are also playing one copy of this card in our Evil Swarm deck, because you can get one copy of the structure deck without paying any money, but you won't be able to get more copies of the structure deck, so we are only playing one copy maximum for every card that is featured only in a structure deck, so like Dark Rebellion Xyz Dragon, for example. And also for bundles like those that you get with Evil Swarm Ophion, we are also counting those as well. So even though the bundles can be bought using money, you can also get them with gems pretty easily, and it's not that expensive anyway, and also you get packs along with the bundle, so it's a pretty good deal. So I will include the bundles as well. So Ophion will be included in the Evil Swarm deck, for example. And finally, I will talk about box chips, because I have seen comments asking me, why aren't you playing like Cosmic in your decks, because you can get those with box chips and it is free to obtain. Well, that is true, and I have used the box chips in some of my older decks in 2023, because that is when box chips were a thing, and then they removed it for a while, and then they brought it back permanently. So I have been using Cosmic Cyclone, for example, in some of my older decks, because it is technically free to obtain, but back then I was also still trying to use as few box chips as possible, because those are still a limited amount. You don't get unlimited box chips, so even for technically free to obtain cards like Cosmic Cyclone, I'm still not playing free copies, because I know that people might not have that many box chips to spare. But for my newer decks, I am still trying to avoid using box chips as much as possible because I know that people have different cards that they want to get from the box chips, and not everyone has box chips left for stuff like Cosmic Cyclone or Floodgate Trap Hole. Even though I do recommend that people use box chips for both Cosmic and Floodgate first before they spend it on anything, but people have the liberty to choose whatever they want, and if they already have used their box chips on something else, they won't be able to have cards like Cosmic that they can get with the box chips. So I'm still trying to avoid using box chips cards as much as possible, even though they are technically free to obtain. And also there are alternatives to the cards that you get from the box chips, even though they are not as good. For example, for backroom removal, you can use stuff like Spiritualism instead of a Cosmic, which is a free-to-play backroom removal, like in my raw deck. Spiritualism is completely free to obtain. You can get it from the card trader, you can get as many copies as you want, so you don't have to worry about using up your box chips or something like that. And for the case of Floodgate Trap Hole, you can always use something like a Horror House, which pretty much does the same thing. And I guess we'll talk about Dream Tickets as well, because Dream Tickets can technically give you anything in the game without spending any money or gems. But again, it kind of defeats the purpose of having a free-to-play deck if you can just use anything you want. And also, Dream Tickets are far more valuable than even box chips or any other tickets or resource in the game. So, I will not use them. So that is pretty much how I define my own free-to-play decks. But you have to keep in mind that I use the term free-to-play usually to mean budget, because the word free-to-play literally just means that you are not spending any money on the game. So any deck could be free-to-play as long as you don't spend money on like multiple structure decks or selection box exclusive cards, for example. Those decks are expensive, but they are still technically free to play, which, you know, doesn't really mean a lot. So usually if you see free to play used around in the Yu-Gi-Oh community, they mean just budget decks that you can get without spending a lot of money. With that said, I still sometimes see people think that my decks are still expensive, even if I'm only using like one main box or two mini boxes, because, to be fair, one main box is still like 8,000 gems, and 8,000 gems are pretty hard to come by, as you probably have first-hand experience. So, one important thing to just keep in mind for any Yu-Gi-Oh! Any Duel Links player, no matter if you're new or old, is to always have a goal in mind when you build a deck and focus on a single deck before moving on to another deck. Because gems are so difficult to grind, especially in late game, it is important to just focus on one deck, and before you finish that deck, don't spend your gems on other packs, because if you do, you will be spending your gems on a whole bunch of different unrelated cards, and when you use up all of your gems or a budget on the game, you'll be left with a pile of useless stuff that you can't build a deck with, and you'll just be sitting there with 0 playable decks. So that is why for new players, I recommend going from a very low budget, very easily buildable deck at first, and then work your way up to more and more expensive decks that you need more resources to build. So for example, when you just start out the game, my favorite pick for new players is always the Red Eye structure deck, even though it's very old and it's not very good, but it is very buildable and it is guaranteed. You can build a Red Eye deck that functions using only 500 gems and a couple of the SR tickets that you get at the beginning of the game. So you don't have to worry about spending all of your gems on a box and not getting the cards that you want. And then afterwards, after you have a deck that kind of really works, you can slowly have another deck goal that you build your deck around, and you can slowly gather the cards for your deck slowly when you already have a deck that already functions. So you can grind XP, or you can grind events using a deck that you already have, like Red Eyes, for example, and then you can slowly just save up gems and then get packs for the deck that you actually want. So that is my opinion and a little advice on how you should be building your decks and investing your gems. And I hope you found this video useful, and I hope this clears up any of the questions you have on how I define my free-to-play decks. And again, the term free-to-play is pretty loose, so don't just yell at me at the comments if you see a deck that I build not strictly adhere to my own rules, because those are my own rules anyway. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.